when you look, for instance, at the food waste problem and you look at the numbers, and in some countries like the US, where two-thirds of what we produce we throw away, and the rest of the world, that's one-third, it's huge.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 250 with Teekay Rezeau-Merah. I consider Teekay to be something of a philosopher when it comes to minimalism, extreme minimalism, and nomadicism. In this conversation, we'll talk about the life experiences that helped shape Teekay and his philosophy on how he lives in this world. He also introduced me to some interesting new to me, minimalism concepts called gazelig and ikigai, which both are really cool. I put some links in the show notes for this episode at thetinyhouse.net/250, where you can find obviously a transcript of today's episode and more info about Teekay, his writing, his podcast, and everything there. So that's thetinyhouse.net/250. But let's get into the interview. But before we get started, did you know that I personally send Tiny House newsletter every week on Tuesdays? It's called Tiny Tuesdays, and it's a weekly email with Tiny House news, interviews, photos, and resources. It's free to subscribe, and I even share sneak peeks of things that are coming up, ask for feedback about upcoming podcast guests, and more. It's really the best place to keep a pulse on what I'm doing in the tiny house space and also stay informed of what's going on in the tiny house movement. To sign up, go to thetinyhouse.net/newsletter, where you can sign up for the Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. And of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. I will never send you spam. And if you ever don't want to receive emails, it's easy to unsubscribe. So again, that's thetinyhouse.net/newsletter. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. All right, I am here with Teekay Rezeau-Merah. Teekay is a Brooklyn-born 90s kid, extreme minimalist, and podcaster. A person of color and part of a religious minority in the West, he has lived in 11 countries so far. Teekay's a mixed and multicultural individual who has had to navigate growing up in foreign settings and cultures. His nomadic journey and personal experiences shaped him into a skeptic, so he questions everything and loves exploring new ways of life. Furthermore, his concerns with the current environmental crisis and animal welfare led him to veganism 5 years ago. Later in the same year, he discovered minimalism and slow living, which gave his life a new meaning. Teekay is now building his own home on wheels from the ground up with his wife and about to take on life as a van lifer. Teekay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much, and thank you for that intro. All of it is true.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I wanna kind of dive into all of it. I guess. So, do you see switching to veganism as kind of the start of your whole minimalist journey?
I definitely do. I actually wrote a piece about it not too long ago, like literally a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
on how veganism introduced me to minimalism. And it's funny because, most people, at least people from the outside, look into veganism and they see it as an animal welfare fight, which it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it entails so much more. I mean, it's as much about health as it is about the environment, as it is about the animals, as it is about human well-being and human welfare.
Yeah.
because we don't realize, I mean, how impactful, the animal agriculture is on our environments, which
Hmm.
causes, you know, a lot of destruction. And like this destruction, it's natural. A lot of natural disasters. These natural disasters cause for people to migrate, to leave their homes, to
Yep.
be forced into leaving their homes and seek a new home, or seeking a new land to, you know, live on. So in the end, veganism touches on so much more than just the animals, if that's
Hmm.
not enough for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually a vegan for a few years, and I'm mostly there still.
Hmm.
Um, but for me, it was, the start of the pandemic and seeing both really seeing the human cost of producing animal products
Right.
in the, contrasted with the pandemic, but then of course the animal welfare stuff and the environmental became really compelling reasons for me as well.
Absolutely.
So, was there a particular, book or podcast or someone that introduced you to minimalism?
Minimalism, not really. I actually, like I said, as I read about veganism, and I had become vegan for like a couple of months. I was pescatarian before,
Hmm.
so I was already aware of some things, but not everything. And so, a couple of months in, I, was looking at ways to reduce my impact on, my carbon footprint and
Yeah.
whatnot. And that's how I stumbled on minimalism. And so I don't recall a book necessarily. I do
Hmm.
remember one podcast which stopped producing since 2020. It's called Heal My Living, something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
It's a solo podcast by a random person who talked about her journey as a minimalist.
Yep.
And that was very compelling for me. So as I, dove deep, went down the rabbit hole,
Hmm.
and started, looking up stuff. A lot of it came up, and at the same time, not enough of it. So that's why I sort of wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and also, talk about my journey on my own podcast and blog and whatnot. Because I figured, if veganism is not for you because you want to stick to how you usually eat and whatnot, and
Hmm.
or for several other reasons, minimalism definitely could be a good, you know, meet me halfway kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when you dive deep into minimalism, you start learning about the impact of everything, like food waste, like the huge problems caused that we cause to the earth because of our overconsumption of everything. And it
Hmm.
literally applies to everything. There's even digital minimalism,
Yep.
which I also wrote about in the past. And it's crazy how much, we think we're civilized, when in reality, we're, definitely not as civilized as we may think we are.
Yeah. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look, for instance, at the food waste problem, and you look
Hmm.
at the numbers, and in some countries like the US, where, two-thirds of what we produce we throw away, and the rest of the world, that's one-third. It's huge, especially when you consider that about 3 million people die of hunger every year. So you see, I mean, as a civilization, as a human civilization, you'd expect us to be at a level today in 2023 where, we don't have these problems anymore. I mean, hunger, come on, like, we make so much food, we have so much technology and human resources, and I like to think empathy towards each other, that these problems shouldn't be, contemporary to our generation, and yet they still are. And I'm only talking about like starvation, but there are other, nutrition related diseases and illnesses that kill millions of people every year. And we still struggle with that. And even in developed countries like the US, you have people still dying from, illnesses that are due to all of that, to
Hmm.
overconsumption, for instance, with like fast foods and everything that we eat, like excess sugar, excess oil, fried foods and whatnot. People are still eating all of that and thinking, for most part, that it's okay or that it's healthy. And for a country like the US, where healthcare is so expensive, you'd expect people to be more aware of all that. But, if this, the economy or the government is not doing its job well enough to be able to inform these people, then, well, I guess it's up to us creators to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Um in your bio and in your writings, you've talked a lot about the idea of a nomadic lifestyle.
Mm.
And I was hoping you could share kind of your definition of what is a nomadic lifestyle to you, and what does your life look like as a nomad?
That's a good question. I grew up in a family of nomads. Actually, my ancestors were nomads, so that's, I guess, part of me. It's in my genes. But for me, being nomadic means you have no one, one home. I say I'm a Brooklyn born, kid, but that's because I was born there, and I get most of my attitude and and my, I guess, character from there. But I lived there less than I lived, for instance, in Ethiopia. I wouldn't
Hmm.
call myself an Ethiopian
Hmm.
for because I lived there for like 4 years and a half. But for me, nomadic lifestyle is just, yeah, it's like you consider everywhere you go and everywhere
Hmm.
you feel at ease as home. And that's what I always felt like moving around. I mean, there hasn't been one place where I've moved at least, right? Lived at least several months where I haven't felt that way because, I feel like when you're general with people, when you make an effort to understand them, to even speak the language, to talk to them, to interact with them on a human level, and you sort of put yourself at the same level as everyone around you, then you start becoming part of whoever you're talking to.
Hmm.
And as a nomad, that's what you're supposed to do. Otherwise, you're just, an expat or something else. But a nomad for me is someone who explores the culture from within, preferably learns the language. When I was in Ethiopia, for instance, I learned, the local dialect to
Hmm.
be able to communicate with the people around me. And I didn't learn it. I didn't learn how to write or read it, but I learned how to speak it, understand it, to understand the intricacies of, you know how they speak and what they say, the humor, which is a huge part for me when learning a language, because I feel like that's how you understand how people communicate in safe place. And yeah, that's what nomading is for me. It's not going someplace and, working in a cafe or whatever, and just, basically working and partying. That's not nomading. That's a different type of
Yeah.
travel. But yeah.
I like the distinction that you drew between like being an expat, because when you said that, it draws to mind like a group of Americans living in Mexico or somewhere, but just kind of still being American, still being, kind of
Right.
preserving their culture and their, way of living just in another place. And
Right.
I like the idea of I envision your nomadic lifestyle almost like you try to kind of almost blend in and become
Absolutely.
like a member of that culture and of that place.
100%. That's it. That's exactly what it is. It's being a part of wherever you go, because, even our ancestors as a whole, as humans, that's what they used to do. That's why they used to be nomads, and there are modern day nomads
Nomadic. Yeah.
who live like that still. I went on a trip in the Sahara Desert,
Hmm.
and there are the what they call the Tuaregs, which are like local nomads who still live in tents, and they have camels, and they move from one place to another depending on the resources. And when you talk to these people, they don't just, go to these places and try to impose themselves. They
Yeah.
actually they don't know borders. They move from one country to another. They don't know borders because for them it's a modern thing that they don't believe in. They just move to the next place to find better shelter and better, you know,
Hmm.
water and resources, and then when it's over, they just move. And yeah, it's all about respecting what's around you.
So you've lived in 11 countries so far. Like, about how long do you like to stay in one place? And are you traveling within the country while you're there?
Absolutely, yes. That's one of the main things about travel for me. The reason I traveled so much because I lived in 11, but I traveled across many more. And the reason being, I don't have a lot of money. I'm not like from a rich family. Like my parents were actually poor when I was a kid, and then they did better, but we were quite poor. The only reason I traveled so much was because when I move somewhere, I like exploring the surroundings. So I start
Hmm.
from within, just like in yoga or in
Yeah.
mindfulness. You start from within, and then you go to the neighboring country in this sense. And so that's what I do. I usually like to explore the cities around, what there is, what's there to see, and then neighboring countries.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, when I moved to France, I decided, well, everything was around. Like for $30, you could go to Prague in Czech Republic. You could go to, Rome. You could go to Barcelona. You could see so many cities around. And so that's exactly what I did.
Cool. Cool. Sounds awesome.
Oh, I haven't answered your question about the length of my
Ah, yes.
stays.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right. As for the length of my stays, I Well, that depends. I mean, when I was young, I grew up, in different countries. So my
Hmm.
parents used to have like contracts, basically like 3 to 4 year contracts.
Okay.
And so we moved every 3 to 4 years. And then when I moved out on my own when I was 18,
Hmm.
at first it was dependent on what I was studying. So if I was in college, if you're in Europe, it's usually 3 years. In the US, it's 4 years. But in Europe, you graduate college in 3 years. So I stayed 3 years. Then I moved for my MBA for 1 year. And then, it was based on what I was doing at the moment. But now
Okay.
that, I've been working for a few years, I like to stay for however long I feel like staying. I've been in France for 5 years now
Hmm.
because I love it here. I also, matured a little bit more. And now I seek stability more than I seek the thrill of life.
Hmm.
So I guess that also changes as you grow up, and the people around you play a major, major part. Because a lot of people ask me like, what was your favorite country or like top five or whatever that you lived in or that you visited, and I'm like, I can't give you that because
Hmm.
there isn't one. It's all about the people. Obviously, there were people that I, got along with more than others, but that applies to every country I've ever been to. And so for me, countries that you go to are part of the decor or the aesthetic or that's the culture. But then the people they actually spend most of your time with and hang out with and share your stories with is what it's all about, not the country itself.
Nice. What is slow living?
Hmm. Deep question, but the simple answer would be slow living is pacing oneself in life in general.
Hmm.
So it applies to everything. It applies to interpersonal relationships. It
Hmm.
applies to work. It applies to our use of technology. It applies to travel. It applies to everything that we do. It's just pacing oneself. It's not necessarily living extremely slowly. Like we still seek something when we live, even when you live slowly. I mean, you can live
Uh-huh.
slowly and write books and write a lot of books. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you could live slowly and you know build an empire if you want to. But like the two can go hand in hand as long as one is not as long as what you're doing is not taken away from what you actually want to be doing. So for
Okay.
me, slow living is about pacing yourself.
Nice. And so now I can see how that might intersect with living as a nomad and the nomadic lifestyle. But can you talk about the intersection of those two?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for one, like I said, I've been here for 5 years. I think I'll be around for another year or two,
Okay.
maybe. That's part of my slow living journey. I don't want to, speed up. I don't want to, you know, go elsewhere because for the sake of going elsewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me to just leave for the sake of leaving. I have to leave if it makes sense, if there's a purpose for my leaving, if
Okay.
I'm seeking something new. And so that's how they intersect. I mean, for me, slow living is it's my daily life. Sometimes I just wake up and decide not to do anything, and that's slow living. And sometimes I do wake up and decide to post, a couple of articles and
Hmm.
record a podcast and go to work and do this and that. And that's also part of my slow living because I know that I can stop whenever I want to.
Nice.
So, and yeah, when it comes to their nomadic lifestyle, it's the same thing. If I want to move, I move. If I don't, then I'm good being where I am.
Cool. So you're currently converting a van to be your home.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
can you tell us about the decision, your decision making process of why you decided on a van? And actually maybe you could tell us about like what is your what is your current living situation? Like what have you kind of looked for to live in, and then why the van?
Okay. So, well, I'm gonna make it short because it's been like a project in the making for
Okay.
years. I just
Okay.
never got to it because the pandemic and
Hmm.
a lot of things happened in
Hmm.
between. But prior to this, I actually was always a fan of those survivalist documentaries and whatnot, and I always wanted
Okay.
to do one of those challenges where I would survive on my own somewhere, blah blah blah. And so that's where the idea actually came from. At first, I wanted to buy a schoolie, like a school bus, and convert it. And then since I was in France, that was like a task, and the legislation here is not like in the US.
Hmm.
So I kind of gave up that project quite fast because of the legislation. And so, yeah, I feel like van living was the second best choice, I guess. Now
Okay.
I realized that it's actually was a blessing in disguise, but back then it was like a plan B kind of thing. And why a van? Because for one, I feel like that's the logical next step as a minimalist.
Hmm.
It's like I have so little that I know, like my wife and I actually have so little that we know that we can fit everything we own into a van and live comfortably. And
Wow.
so that was the first, you know, I guess reason. The second one was an environmental one because when you live in a van, you actually have a much lesser environmental impact.
Hmm.
You're not consuming as much of anything like water, the heating that you use, the AC that you use if you're in a hot climate,
Yeah.
and the of course the materials to build a home or to live in one. And so all of it made sense on an environmental sense and on an environmental point of view. And then
Hmm.
from a personal point of view, it's also like living in a van means more freedom, and that's what we're looking for, and that's what we want. And for like, yeah, it's the logical next step. I feel like the one after it would be to own some land so that we
Hmm.
can be, free, and so we can grow our own fruits and vegetables and whatnot. And yeah, live simply, basically.
Nice. So your van, and tell me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. The name is Pingu.
Right, right, right.
What what is that? Does that name have a special meaning for you?
Yeah, it does. It's actually it comes from the I don't know if you know the cartoon, the Pingu cartoon.
No.
It's like it's a cartoon about a penguin. I don't know if it's a if they call it a cartoon. It's like
Mhm.
it's what is it? I mean, it is like a cartoon,
Okay.
and so it's about this penguin who just has a crazy life, and like they don't talk; they just say gibberish, but you understand what they're saying because they're very expressive. And yeah, for some reason, my wife was a fan of that, and I was too. And so, because it's black and white, and our van is too, we decided to call it Pingu. So
Nice.
that's where it
I like
comes
that.
from.
I like when there's a connection like that. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Pingu is funny. I mean, he's extremely funny. He's always angry at life, and he gets overwhelmed like pretty fast.
Uh-huh.
But then, like the dad or the mom comes around and they show him, and he's like, "Oh, it was that simple." So it's all about like exploring life and learning through
Okay.
their experiences.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so how long have you been working on it, and kind of how far along is the conversion?
Oh man, that's the kind of question I don't want to answer. Like, I mean, we got it like a year ago, literally to the day almost. Like we got it, I think it was on the 5th of February of last year. And we started building it in March, and it's almost done, but it's not quite yet. I mean, I don't know if we can say we procrastinated, but we didn't work on it as much as we should have probably in the summer because life happens, and we also don't have like a place where we can work on it like every day. It's like
Uh-huh.
parked in the street, so you have to work, like you have to find places and spots where you can actually work, like do the heavy duty work, which we didn't have unfortunately. So that kind of took us more time than it should have. But I feel
Mhm.
like for anyone acquiring a van right now, if you have a garage or you have like a driveway or something, if you have family who does, you can, if you work on it like almost every day, you can finish it within maybe 3 months, I say, like from
Yeah.
the ground up.
Yeah.
Because there's the insulation and the windows and the electricity, the water, all of it takes time, and there is a lot of work in there. But I
Mhm.
mean, you work on it a couple of hours a day, almost every day, you can get it done within 3 months, easy.
Nice. Um, so in your bio, there were a couple of, you mentioned a couple different ways of living, like nomadicism, wabi sabi.
Right.
There were a couple of there that I didn't know, and I don't know that my audience has ever heard, and I'm gonna probably kill the pronunciation, but um, Gezelig,
Yeah.
Gezellig, yeah. What's
Right. Right.
that?
Right. That's I think it's a Northern European lifestyle,
Okay.
which basically entails and involves minimalism
Hmm.
and being mindful with how you use your time
Okay.
and how you use your energy and what you focus on.
Uh
And the
huh.
way I think of it is to basically put your passions at the heart of everything that you do.
Uh huh.
That's how I see it. That's how I apply it to my life because at some point, obviously, I was like everyone else, working, 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 and
Uh
thinking
huh.
about, saving and thinking about money. But then, yeah, when I discovered that when I was in Holland, I think I was like, huh, this makes sense. This makes sense.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
why would I have to put everything I love to the side and focus on work instead of just focusing on, the things that I care about and then putting work around it to
Yeah.
make it happen. And that's what it entails, at least for me.
Nice. That I like that a lot. And then there was another one I actually ended up looking it up. Ikigai.
Ikigai is beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Ikigai is about it's about balance. It's
Yeah.
about balancing everything that's a Japanese concept. It's a little bit more known in the world,
Uh huh.
and yeah, it's about balancing basically, which it's about looking into what you like to do, and
Hmm.
then what you do well, and then trying to find a balance between that and making a living out of it. So if you're an artist, for instance, and you love playing the guitar and you're actually good at it, then maybe find a way to go that way and make a career out of it, and you'll never work a day in your life, as cliche as that sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a cool, it's kind of one of those diagrams of four circles
Right.
and they overlap. I'm going to put it in the show notes for the episode because I think it's just so visual and it makes so much sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, tell us about your podcast. You're a podcast host yourself.
Yeah. So my podcast, well, that started 4 years ago
Hmm.
now. So it's been up, and I've been doing like weekly episodes for all 4 years.
Uh-huh.
Posted about 200 and something episodes so far.
Wow.
And at first, yeah, it was just a solo podcast. So I was just looking for a way to express myself, express my thoughts, and
Hmm.
have some feedback on my thoughts, because I was experimenting with leaving social media, or at least putting social media to the side. So I was
Hmm.
looking for a new way to express myself in a meaningful way. And writing takes a lot of time. Podcasting used to take me less time.
Hmm.
When you write, you have to research everything, and you have to write it down, make sure it's readable, and then you post it, and then by the time people find it, it could take a lot of time. With podcasting, because it was becoming this big thing in 2019, early 2019.
Hmm.
I mean, it was prior to that, but in 2019 it was not as big as it is today, for instance, and
Yeah.
it's only going to get bigger from here on out. I realized, yeah, that was a good way for me to do two things: to talk about things that I cared about, and to practice my verbal fluency. Because, like I said earlier before we started recording, I am a stutterer, and I struggled with that for most of my life.
Hmm.
And podcasting actually helped me through that. So it was a good way to practice that, to practice public speaking without being public, and yes, to put valuable content out there. The first couple of seasons I dabbled in it, and I was just trying to figure it out. And then
Hmm.
within the third season, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do with the podcast. And I started doing mixed solo, and then episodes with guests. And as
Hmm.
the third season progressed, I was having more and more guests, and putting out clips that would answer like specific questions, so that people don't have to sit through the whole episode.
Yeah.
I would chop it down into shorter clips and post them out there, and that gained a lot of traction. And on the podcast, I talk about, it's a good mirror of my life, because I talk about all the things that I'm curious about, which is technically everything. So I work in marketing. So I used to talk a lot about marketing, and then I switched it up a little bit, because I started getting interested in neuromarketing and
Hmm.
neuroscience as a
Mm.
whole. And so, yeah, I had a few guests to talk about that, about human behavior, psychology, education. So many of these, timeless, I guess, matters that everyone could relate to today or 20 years from now. And that's what I wanted. I wanted something that's going to be timeless and valuable
Hmm.
for many years to come. And yeah, that's what I'm building my show around. I usually try to add new concepts to it. For instance, lately I added poems, because 2023 I started writing poems, and I was like, yeah, this could be good for the podcast. I mean, I'm gonna try it out, do maybe 10 or 15, and then see if people like it. And if they don't, then I can stop and keep writing for myself.
Very cool. Well, I look
Yeah.
forward to checking out the show. It's called Clarity with TK, and it's on all the podcast places wherever you're listening to this interview right now. You can probably find Clarity with TK, and we'll put a link to the show and to TK's blogs, writings, and all that stuff in the show notes for the episode today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, I mean, I try to be as broad and as possible, but
Hmm.
then I also try to be as concise in what I say as possible. That's the
Nice.
minimalist side of me.
Yeah.
Like I dedicate my whole Medium page to minimalism now, when in the past it used to be all over the place. Now I'm trying to write only about minimalism and how it helped me through different things in my life. It helped me
Hmm.
push through when I experienced my first anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and actually heal. And it
Mm.
helped me, sort out my financial situation. Although I don't work as much as my peers, but I'm in a better financial situation compared to some of them. It helped me through, feeling less overwhelmed and feeling peaceful and finding like this calmness and inner peace. And yeah,
Yeah.
it touches on so much. And so I wanted to dedicate my whole Medium page to my journey as a minimalist, and yeah, dig deep into it.
Awesome. Well, one thing that I like to ask all my guests is, are there any resources like books or podcasts or just one or two or three things that have really inspired you along your journey that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Absolutely. Well, for one, I would like to thank you for this opportunity and
Of
for your
course.
questions. I really enjoyed answering them. Two, so the resources, well, there is Matt Diavella,
Hmm.
who is a YouTube maker and
Hmm.
who talks about the benefits of minimalism for one, but also he gives all sorts of great lessons, great life lessons. I genuinely enjoy his content. It's very soothing. It's really well made. I highly recommend his page. He writes a lot as well, so yeah.
Okay.
And then there's another YouTuber. I know you probably ask about books, but I'm going to give you YouTube creators.
That's fine.
There's Casey Neistat. I'm pretty sure everyone knows him. But
Yep.
if you don't, then Casey is definitely the guy who motivated me to start my podcast and to do it like with so much consistency, because I mean, he is the prime example of what being consistent with your work can do to your
Hmm.
career, or to do to you, to fulfill you as a human being, and to put out like great stuff. I'm not saying do things consistently if they're harmful, but if they can be helpful in any way, then do it with consistency. And then in terms of books, I mean, I could give you a whole list, but I'm going to give you one that's actually equally entertaining and makes one think. That will
Hmm.
be The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Hmm.
Amazing book. If you haven't read it, please do. It's just amazingly well written. It's not too long to read, and it's full with life lessons. And it's always worth reading again, because I read it several times and I always learn something.
Nice.
So yeah, I guess yeah, those three writer creators are definitely worth checking out. Could give you a whole list, but you asked me for three, so I'm gonna stick to three.
Perfect. Well, TK Rezeau-Merah, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, I did too, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to TK Rezeau-Merah for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes, including links to TK's writings and podcast, and a complete transcript over at thetinyhouse.net/250. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/250. Well, that is all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.